the Unhinged Game Boy Advance SP by BOXY Pixel. This all-metal housing not only allows for a cool update to your old SP, but it also includes room for a 3.5mm headphone jack and a USB-C charging board. In this video I'm going to be showing you my methods on how I install both of those things, along with building out the entire Game Boy. And if you like modifying old consoles like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel to get updated on future videos. Now let's get into this build. Alright, so this is pretty much everything we're going to need for our build. We have our donor SP right here, and we're going to be using this cool purple unhinged shell with the purple buttons. Haven't built this one yet, so I'm excited to see how that one turns out. Have our screen here, a little bit of wire, screwdrivers. So the first thing we're going to start with is disassembling our donor SP and taking out the parts that we're going to need to transfer over to the unhinged shell. So let's go ahead and get started with that first. So when removing the back, we will need the rods that are supporting the LNR triggers and the springs. So go ahead and pop those out and set those aside. We're also going to need the metal back plate. And we won't be using any of these screws, so you can go ahead and keep them with your original shell, because the BOXY Pixel unhinged shell uses its own special screws. Alright, next comes the board. So remove the 3 screws, fold the board in. We will be needing the rubber pads, so go ahead and pull those off as well. We will also be using the speaker. So the only other thing we're going to need from the donor SP is the LED light pipe. So just very carefully, sometimes these things can get stuck in here. It looks like I got lucky, and this one's pretty loose. Slowly pop that out. We're going to be gluing that into the new shell. So now that we have all of our components ready from our donor SP board, let's go ahead and move on to prepping the unhinged shell. First thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and you can set the battery cover and the front part aside, because we're going to go ahead, because you do this first, you will forget to do it. Go ahead and put the metal plate right in the back. There's a little nub right here, so you only are going to need 1 screw on this side, but there's a little nub on the right side where this kind of pops in. And then you just have to do 1 screw on the left. The next thing that we have to prep is gluing the little LED light pipe. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is install the USB-C charging board and the headphone jack. So we'll start with the USB-C charging board. It goes in this little pocket on the right side. I just use a little bit of this really thin double-sided foam tape. Stick it right in there. And I've never had any issues with this holding it, because it really fits right in there, and this just helps stick it in place. Now when it comes to the headphone jack, and I'll have a link to all these parts in the description box below. It doesn't quite fit perfectly in the cutout spot that they have right here, which is fine. I'll show you how we get around doing that, but see, it's kind of a little bit loose. And what I like to do is I like to take a little bit of this and I triple it up to where it's like a little square, and I just stick it right to the edge. Just like that. And that keeps it from pushing in when the headphones get pushed into it, and then I also just glue it in place, so it's just kind of like it's double secure in there. It's worked out great for me. I haven't had any issues with doing it like this, so I just tack a little bit of hot glue right in there, and then I just smush this in, and then I'll solder the wires to it after. Alright, so now that we have all the gluing out of the way, we can go ahead and get started on soldering in the wires. So there's going to be 4 wires on the headphone jack and then 2 wires on the USB-C board. And I'm going to show you how I personally route them so that they are nice and neat and easy to solder into place. Now I like to use these colored wires. It makes it a lot easier. I don't have to go and keep track of what point goes to what. I usually dedicate 2 of the wires to the positive and negative on the USB-C board, and then the rest of the wires I dedicate to the headphone jack. So the USB-C board's easy. It's just negative and positive on these 2 points right here. And then for the headphone jack, it's a little bit trickier, but it's really not. It's really the same thing. We're going to use these, and I'm going to reference the BOXY Pixel installation guide, which I will put a link to down in the description below. And basically it shows you color codes, which wires to go where, and I just use the same system, and I wire mine to the back. You can also wire it to the front pads right here. I've done it both ways, but I think when it comes to routing the wires, it's just easier to do them all in the same place for me. That's just how I like to do it. And I'm going to go ahead and tin the points for the headphone jack too. Alright, so I route the wires underneath the speaker hole and kind of up off to the side above where the switch sits. And that's what I'm going to do with all the wires. So they're all going to be like that. So in their headphone jack layout, it shows a headphone jack that has 6 pins. We're using one with 4 pins, so just disregard the top 2 pins and we're going to use the ones from the bottom 4 down. So I'm using yellow to represent red since I already used red in the USB-C layout, and I want to have all my wires different colored. This is how it should look. So the next thing we're going to do is route all these wires. So you want to route them up and above the switch here, because if you do it like this under the switch, it makes the shell hard to close. So I'm just going to get a little bit of Kapton tape. I'm going to go ahead, sit all the wires like that. Tuck them down. And go ahead and throw that piece of tape on there. Okay, so now that we have all the wires soldered in and they're all routed to where we need them to be, we can go ahead and start dropping in our buttons and assembling this thing. So first thing, let's go ahead and drop in the speaker. And then I'm going to go ahead and prepare my screen. So I'm using the Funny Playing IPS SP screen. This is the screen that this shell was designed to use. I have not tried any other screens in this build, just so you know. So I go ahead and stick the ribbon in place and tape the ribbon in place so that it's straight, because it can rip. Peel off the film and just kind of lay it in place so that it's ready to go. And have the wire handy. This is for the brightness control. All right, let's go ahead and get our buttons. What I like to do is take my favorite game, kind of rest the whole shell on top of it so that the buttons sit down a little bit and it's easier to set the board in place. So let's go ahead and stick these silicone pads in their place. So at this point, we're ready to attach the screen to the motherboard. So go ahead and attach the screen to the board like this. Be careful not to tear it. Okay, now that the screen's clamped in, let's go ahead and solder in the brightness control. So if you've never installed one of these screens into an SP before, there is a solder point at the top right here of the ribbon. It's a little dot, and then you're gonna go to, it's this point right here. All right, go ahead and flip that over, and then you want the screen ribbon to loop upwards like that. Go ahead and set that in. Make sure your wires are above the switch right here, and go ahead and get a screw in on the center point of the board. So go ahead and screw a screw in right there. Now don't screw it all the way down, because the next part we're gonna have to lift up on the board a little bit, and this is just how I do it. So hold the board by the back ports right here, and then this is gonna pop right underneath those ports. Just like that. Make sure it looks flush on the sides, and then go ahead and get screws in on the top. And then go ahead and tighten up the screw right here. And then you can go ahead and put this other one right here. Now at this point, I like to pop a battery in there and just make sure everything is looking and feeling good before I carry on and start soldering in all the other wires. So I got a little SP battery right here. I'm just gonna go ahead and hold it in place. We got audio, brightness control seems to be working. Buttons feel good. All the buttons feel, man, that looks so good. All right, looking good, feeling good. So now we're on to the hardest part, which isn't really that bad. If I can do it, you can definitely do it. We're going to be soldering in the charging for the USB-C and then all the wires for the headphone jack. So let's go ahead and separate those out a little bit. Let me get some of these batteries out of my way, and my favorite game. So these are the points you're going to be needing to solder to for the USB-C charging board. So we're gonna get ground from the side right here of this port, just on the side, and then the positive goes to the second leg from the right. And for this, you're gonna wanna use like a really fine solder tip. Makes it a lot easier to not bridge connections. And then it should look something like that. I'll leave a link in the description of the exact wires that I'm using. It's a lot easier if you use really thin wires. A lot of times people will use thicker wires, and it makes it harder to close the shell up. So you definitely want to use thinner wires for this. So let's move on to the headphone jack. So in the headphone jack, we're going to start from the right to the left because I feel like it's easier that way. So the first one we're going to solder in is going to be the red wire, which we substituted with the yellow wire. All right, so the yellow wire is going to go to the farthest pin on the right. From when I'm looking right here, it's this pin all the way to this side. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this wire because I like them to all be kind of neat, so cut it right there. You might need to get a little extra solder on these pins. Just make sure you don't bridge them, which is probably the hardest part of this, is not bridging the pins. Because if you bridge any of the pins, your system might not turn on, it might not charge, or you might not have audio. So if you run into any of those things, check the pins. Okay, so that one's in, and now we just have to follow exactly what they have. So the next one would be orange, and that's gonna go to the middle Next one's going to be the purple, which goes to the second from the left. There we go. And then the last one, of course, is the blue, which goes to the very last pin on the left. All right. Looks good. Should look something like that. Nice and neat. You can go ahead and throw some Kapton tape on there. I probably will. Let's go ahead and test it first. So, like I said, I like to test it as I go. So I have some normal headphones here. Now there's one thing I do want to note about these headphone jacks is they work best with the TRS headphones, which is the headphones that do not have the mic on them. These ones do have the mic on them. And if you aren't familiar, I'll show you. These are the headphones with the 3 black rings on them. That means they have a mic usually. These ones work, but sometimes you have to pop the headphone jack like out a little bit to make it make a good connection. But if you have TRS headphones, which is just the 2 rings on them, you shouldn't have those issues. Because I have some headphones like that and I never have any issues like that. So let's go ahead and test it out. Yep, and we're good. Make sure it's shutting off correctly. Yep, okay. Oh, there's a camera. Hear that? My mics are up here. Cool, right? So we're good there. And if you are not getting audio out of the speaker, you probably bridged the pins. And like I said, so definitely check that and make sure that you're all good there. All right, the last thing to do now is just install our 1600 milliamp battery. But first, we have to go ahead and install some purple L&R triggers. So to solder in the battery, we're gonna need to feed the wires in through the back hole here. Then flip this over, set it down. These are the 2 points in the back that we'll be soldering the battery to. The right is the positive and the left is the negative. And if you got those in correctly, should be able to just power it up right there. Go ahead and throw your switch in there. This part can get a little tricky closing it. Sometimes it doesn't really want to close because of the pins. Sometimes what I have to do is I have to physically move the pin to pop in. Feels like something else is hanging up. Hold on. Is it this? Oh, it's the switch. Sometimes the switches are weird too. There we go. There we go. Just make sure everything looks flush before you start screwing it together. Make sure it still turns on too. Okay, sometimes the wire, it's a little crazy on you. All right, so we're gonna worry about routing that after. So I have to use this little screwdriver. This is a normal screwdriver I use, but the funny story, the first time I ever built one of these, I was using this screwdriver and I couldn't get the screw to tighten down. And I didn't know what was going on. Like I thought that there was like something blocking it. It was like, no, just this screwdriver doesn't fit in this hole, so I have to use this little baby one. You do not want to over tighten these screws either. Like once they stop, just stop because they strip super easily. All right, this battery doesn't fit in here perfectly, but it's not a big deal. I just take some more of this foam tape, fold it, stick it in right here. and you're good. Go ahead and slap this in. Sometimes you gotta make sure the wires are routed up because it can create a little gap. So you're gonna have to tuck them in the top. And now we're laying flush. I really like the way that this one turned out. Let's make sure the charging is working. There it is. You see the orange light? It is charging, so it does function. Well, there we have it, guys. We built a BOXY Pixel unhinged, fully purple Game Boy Advance SP with an IPS screen and a 1600 milliamp battery, USB-C charging, and functional headphone jack. That's a lot of words. I'll have the links to all the materials, all the parts, and all the tutorials from BOXY Pixel's website in the description down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Well, there you have it, guys. The BOXY Pixel unhinged Game Boy Advance SP. In my opinion, one of the most unique Game Boy Advance mods that are out there right now. If you have any questions about the build, feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. We have also just launched our own official website. Here you can get 10% off all of the parts that I personally use for my builds using the code YouTubeFam. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give your boy a like down below, and I'll see y'all in the next video.